All right. So welcome everyone to the September 2020 Family and Community Webinar. From all of us at RACMA, we want to say welcome. If you are new to these webinars, quick overview of who RACMA is. We are a small nonprofit located here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and we are dedicated to serving those living with memory loss in familiar home settings. So we are a direct service provider to those living with memory loss and dementias. This webinar series presents information and opportunities to connect with others who love those living with dementia as well. And everything we cover in this webinar is not to take the place of medical advice. It truly is, the content is a set of guidelines, some practices you can try, and should be viewed as supplemental in nature. So in talking with loved ones and in a lot of the best practice research and a lot of community dialogues with folks living with dementia, one of the big things that comes up again and again is this idea of living in the present, which is kind of vague phrasing. And there isn't always a lot of information on how to live in the present with your loved one. So that's part of the reason that I chose this webinar topic today, was trying to pull together all of that information, all of the advice that I've heard from, those community dialogues, listening to podcasts, watching webinars from other service providers, as well as really hearing from folks living with dementia. It just comes up and again. So really trying to pull that information together. So a couple of quick outcomes that I want to make sure that you know what you're going to get by listening to or participating in this webinar. First and foremost, we're going to review the impacts of dementia on living in the present. So what does that actually mean for the person living with dementia? We're going to discuss strategies for loved ones to be able to prepare for visits, phone calls, and spending quality time together. And then we're going to walk through some best practices and quick tips for very concrete strategies of what it means to be spending time with your loved one and actually spending time living in the present moment together. So that's what you'll get out of spending time with us today. Some quick webinar logistics so everybody knows what's going on. Please be sure that you keep your lines muted. You do have phone and web controls. Please stay on mute until we get to the Q&A. Now, that doesn't mean you can't chat in your questions. I've got the chat all pulled up, so I will be able to see if you send in any questions or comments. This webinar in particular, we're going to be doing a number of moments where you get to talk back and give your perspective and ideas if you wish to. So you can go ahead and chat in. So the webinar is being recorded. So please, for those of you who are attending, if that's important information that you know, we will send out the webinar afterwards. So I'll probably get it out by probably Friday, end of day Friday or Monday is my goal. We upload them to YouTube and then we send them out as a resource to everyone who signed up. And then if there are additional resources for the topic for this particular webinar, we'll send those out with that email as well. Your video is always optional. Again, it is being recorded, so if you don't want your video on the internet, it's okay to go ahead and turn your video off. And we already talked about that part, use the chat for questions. So a quick note about who I am and why I'm talking to you today. Again, if you are a person who's come before, welcome. But for those of you who maybe are newer, my name is John Anna. It's just two names put together. I'm John Anna Gans. I am RACMA's training manager. I had the opportunity to join the RACMA staff in December of 2019. So we're slowly coming up on a year here. I'm so excited. And a quick word about why I work for RACMA and what I care about working for RACMA. Memory care is not the field that I spent most of my professional career so far in. When I left my former field, I was really looking I knew I wanted to work for a nonprofit. I knew I wanted to work for a mission-driven place that I could really support the work. And I could use all of the skills and talents that I have developed over my life in service of that mission. And so when I interviewed at Rockma, I immediately figured out, like right away from that first interview with our executive director, Brandon Spears, that Rockma seemed to fit all of the things I was looking for. And thankfully, Brandon agreed. So I've been here almost a year. If you ever need to get a hold of me, if you have questions, concerns, if you're looking for some maybe research that I might have mentioned or talked about, you can always get a hold of me at jgans@rockma.org, or you can always give me a phone call at 612-564-3118. Okay, so let's just get going right in. So this is your first opportunity to chat in, if you wish, and answer the question: what does living in the present mean for you? So I'm going to pause for just a second and drop quiet to let people chat in if they wish to. Don't worry if you're not in a chatty mood. I have thoughts on what living in the present means already. So I'll hang tight for just a moment, let you think. And again, chat in if you wish. Okay, I don't see any immediate chats. That's no pressure, no worries. Um, oh, I just didn't wait long enough. Forgive my lack of patience. So we had someone chat in, talk to them about the world they are in today. And another person just chatted in, meeting our loved one in the place that they are. Oh my gosh, yes, those are great examples of what living in the present means. I'll just keep an eye on the chat if you want to keep typing in if you're currently adding to the conversation. When I think about what it means to live in the present, something that comes to mind for me is really paying attention to what's happening around me. And especially if I'm thinking about what living in the present means in having a relationship with someone or spending time with them, it means really being fully there. Okay. And really focusing on not what happened yesterday, not what's going to happen tomorrow, but really what's happening right now and the time that we have together right in this moment. I really love what the folks have chatted in, talking to people about the world they're in and meeting loved ones in the place that they are. I think those are absolutely great answers to the question of what does living in the present mean? And of course, it's going to mean something a little bit different for everyone. So if your answer to what does living in the present mean looked a little different, that's a-okay. When we're talking about living in the present, life is, for most folks, life is really oriented around this very typical arc that I just put up on the screen of we start with the past, then we're in the present, and then we're moving toward the future. So it's a one directional arrow. And each time period is really important to the development of our self, like our actual selves, and our connections to people, places, and things. We really orient time around remembering, which is the past, and we really orient about dreaming, which is the future. Typically, when we're living in the present, we're mostly just trying to like hustle through the day, do all the tasks that we need to do, go to work if you're going to work, get your chores done, get your errands finished. The present is so frequently about just kind of managing as it's coming, everything as it's coming. And so when we're talking about living in the present, we're actually asking ourselves to do something a little bit different that we wouldn't typically do. By asking ourselves to slow down and say, what's going on around me? How am I connecting to this moment right now? How am I really being here and not dreaming of the future or remembering the past? How am I honoring right now? So I think this is an important question to start with for this particular topic because living in the present is hard, right? So I want to talk about what that means for folks living with dementia. So there are a number of impacts that come from living with a diagnosis of dementia. And that happens for both you and your loved one. That diagnosis can change things relatively quickly for folks. Above most other things, the wide array of pretty profound changes that occur with your loved one really impacts how you interact right now and today. So we see physical changes, we see cognitive changes, we see emotional changes. And we also see social changes for someone who has been diagnosed and is living with dementia. Things like we start to see old habits show up. There are personality changes that can happen. Things like withdrawal, getting really quiet, um, kind of like pulling into themselves. Changes in mood regulation. So mood can feel a little bit unpredictable for folks. And changes in social regulation also can happen. So that makes living in the present a little bit more challenging because so much of modern, and not even modern life, human life is really structured around expectations of what you're supposed to do, what you're supposed to feel like, what your mood is supposed to look like in these important moments, what your social habits and responses are supposed to look like. And so when we see these changes, it can kind of bring a screeching halt to all that forward momentum of just getting through the day and moving forward. And it really causes us to say, whoa, we got to pay attention to what's happening right now. And that's a direct result of the changes that are happening from dementia. Some more impacts on the present. And for those of you who have loved ones, this is probably old information for quite a bit of you. So for those of you who are newer to the topic, hang tight. One of the big challenges that can happen in how it changes the relationship with the present is that there is no cure for most types of dementia. And that is really challenging, especially when we're thinking about how we receive those diagnoses or how our medical providers talk to us, right? Especially when you get the information of you have a terminal disease, right? That really changes. And the fact that these are diseases that don't have a cure also really changes that relationship to the present. For loved ones, so for all of you, you have to come to terms with the fact that there's going to be very little control over the things that happen next. And there are a lot of anxious moments. And the same is true for your loved one, especially for folks in the earlier stages. There's going to be a lot of changes that are outside of their control and a lot of anxious, scary moments. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be really beautiful moments too, but really highlighting that it changes how you're connecting. It changes the plans that you might have had with your loved one, or the things you thought you were going to do. That really shifts away from the future into this present moment. The fear and uncertainty that can come with diagnosis can really prompt that focus shift. And some folks can really focus on the past and think, oh my gosh, all the things we didn't do, all the fights we had, all the things I said, how does that look? Or really focusing on that future of saying, oh my gosh, well, now what happens? What are we going to do? I thought we were going to have retirement together. I thought we were going to grow old together. I thought you would always be there because you're my sister or my brother. And so that can really, really shift for folks. So it's impacting not just like, oh gosh, we have to fix whatever's happening right now, focus on the present, but also outside of those immediate moments, really focusing on what has happened or what will happen, shifts that ability to connect in the present. And it's important to also talk about that because there are no known cures, many people start to focus on the disease and the progression, the type or the type of diagnosis that someone gets, because of course, dementia is an umbrella term that covers a wide variety of diagnoses. Folks can get really stuck on what they're going to lose as a direct result of the disease. And that is for folks who live with dementia, as well as the folks who love the people who are living with dementia. So loved ones can get really lost in the process of coping with the diagnosis and the progression. Many providers give the advice to stay focused on the person. So really trying to highlight that here because of that impact on the present. Stay focused on the person because it's really easy for diagnosis and symptoms to take over conversations and experiences, which, especially in the earlier stages, can be really frustrating for your loved one. And it can also be really frustrating for you because that changes the nature of the relationship. Dementia also causes some changes for your loved one that's pretty specific to them, in that as they move through the journey of dementia, eventually they stop remembering the past and they stop having a sense of the future. And that's just a part of the progression. But what that means for you and what that means for your loved one is that the only option that they have is to live in the present. Whatever's happening right now for them, whatever's going on around them in this exact moment. There might be flashes or snips of the past or the future, especially in the early to middle stages. But as that continues, those will go away over time. So that poses some pretty big challenges, as we talked about, because human life really is built on remembering and dreaming. So remembering past, dreaming forward, as tools to make life meaningful. So when we have to focus because our loved one is only able to focus on the present moment, it causes some pretty big shifts in the relationships that you have, that you've built, and the ways that you connect. The final impact that I really want to address today, because I think this is such an important one, is that dementia ultimately means that you are in a slow and extended grieving process. And this is something that there's a couple of podcasts I've gotten really into that I really enjoy listening to, because they are from the experiences of folks living with dementia. So really talking about what it looks like and their loved ones. And I really love hearing those conversations. I find them so valuable and so illuminating. And consistently, I've heard the phrase in those podcasts of it's the long goodbye. And so that slow and extended grieving is really difficult. So especially for those of us who've ever experienced the death or the loss of a loved one that came suddenly, it's a very different grieving process than trying to love someone who's still present, but not present in the way that they used to be. So when we start to lose our folks, or who we understood our folks and our people to be over time, sometimes over the course of many years, sometimes it's faster than that, there's this constantly renewed sense of grief, of trying to let go of what was and still try to hold on to what is and what is still coming. So those are some pretty big impacts from dementia, and how it really changes how your loved one is connecting to you in the present, as well as how you are connecting to your loved one in the present. Okay. So this is another opportunity for you to chat in if you would like. Of course, you don't have to. I got plenty of thoughts. But I think it's really important to ask the question, because this is a question that has come up in those podcasts that I listen to of, what makes embracing who your loved one is right now, today, difficult? Because folks talk about, gosh, it's so hard to look at her and see. It's so hard to look at him. It's so hard to know who he was. So those are some of the things that I've heard consistently. So I just wanted to give an opportunity, if anyone wanted to shout out or chat in, is more accurate than shouting out, of what makes embracing who they are now a little bit challenging or difficult for you. So I'm gonna drop quiet again to let you think for a second and chat in. I'll try to be more patient this time. I see only connection is on the phone. Not sure where dad is on the day. Oh my gosh, absolutely. Especially right now during the COVID-19 pandemic, where folks don't have that in person all the time anymore. There's a lot of challenges around being in person. So when you do only have that connection on the phone, that can be really difficult to understand. Where is my person at? How are they feeling? What's going on for them? What is their present state like? How are they connecting to the present? So thank you for chatting in. That's a great example. I think it's important to acknowledge, ooh, someone else just chatted in. I'm not sure where he's at on a given day. Seems the conversation is assessing where he's at. Oh yeah, right? You as a loved one are trying to prepare for and find those opportunities for connection, and trying to understand, okay, so what skills, abilities, and functions do we have right now? What's going on right in this moment? It can be really challenging to embrace who they are now because you're not actually quite sure who they are right now. So yeah, absolutely. That's a lot of what I've heard as well. Even listening to like folks at Rockma, listening to those conversations, listening to staff members talk about like, oh, we got to figure out like, okay, where's she at right now? How's she feeling today? What are we seeing in this moment? How is that different from yesterday? So that constant assessment doesn't leave a lot of time for just being together. So thank you for chatting in. Absolutely. And I think it's so important to talk about these issues and to talk about these questions openly and honestly. Oh, someone else just chatted in. Conversation is increasingly incoherent and only by phone. With poor eyesight, video is not possible. Yeah, absolutely. So really echoing sort of those challenges and those changes because you're trying to figure out how to navigate what you have right now. So again, thank you. Okay, talking about these particularly difficult moments, I think are critical to being able to process and move forward. So that's why I actually wanted to put them on here, even though it's a little bit kind of like it's a question that hits home for folks. So thank you for sharing. So let's now talk about what are things you can do differently, okay? Or what are things that you can do to really set the stage for living in the present with your loved one? And of course, if at any point y'all have ideas or things that you do to set your stage, please go ahead and chat things in. I will absolutely share them so that way everyone has the benefit of the lessons you've learned and the things that you've done. Okay. So when I'm talking about setting your stage for living in the present, I'm talking about getting you ready and really thinking through what are some steps, what are some things that you can do, what are ways you can help center yourself and be able to really move past remembering and dreaming and be here now. So one of the big things I've heard again and again, and that I see is just so critical, is create your centering rituals. And when I say rituals, I just mean like a habit or a routine. It doesn't have to be anything bigger than that. So this is going to look different based on every single person. However, what has to be consistent in creating centering rituals is the need to go through your own thoughts, kind of sorting through your own emotions, considering and thinking through what are the troubles from the day that are kind of like nagging at you or like in your brain, what hopes, what fears, kind of all the pieces that come with loving with someone who is changing either slowly or rapidly, what comes with being there for that person and what comes with the changing relationship that you've had. So before you make a phone call, before you do a video call, before you go do an outdoor visit, if you can visit outdoors, really setting time aside, and it can be just a few moments, just for the record, really setting time aside before you make that connection to build up your own ritual or your set of affirming practices or statements that help you address your own hesitancy, but also support your well-being. Because if you're not okay, it's going to be a difficult interaction. If you haven't thought through your ideas, your emotions, your experiences, what you're carrying into that moment, it's going to just complicate being in that moment and being present. So to set that stage, you're going to want to find centering rituals. So for example, this is actually a centering ritual that I do. Or it's more of a habit than a ritual. It feels weird to say ritual about my candle. But one of the things that I do is when I know that I have to have a difficult conversation, or I'm feeling a little bit frazzled and I want to be able to show up for our residents in a really healthy and functional way, I spend 10 minutes, I'll light a candle. So I have little candles all over my house. I'll light a candle and just focus for 10 minutes. So that's all it is. It's like a 10-minute thought process on how to leave fulfilled from the interaction. How can I bring my best self into the interaction? And how can I really support a positive present moment before I even get to that moment? So no matter what happens in it, how can I make sure that I'm showing up to really bring something good to the interaction? Other folks have talked about things like creating a set of centering phrases that they use before they go and visit. So one of the ones that I heard listening into some of those conversations between folks is, I love who she was and I love who she is, which I thought, it was a husband. I just thought it was such a beautiful thing to be able to say, to really like bring that centering in and say, nope, I'm like, I love who she was. I love who she is. They're not the same person, but I'm doing this. Other phrases or things can be things like, we are still growing together and we can grow together if I make the adjustment. So find whatever works for you. Maybe you're not a candle person. Maybe you're not a mantra person, right? Whatever works for you, what you need. Maybe you journal. I'm not sure. Find the thing, try a couple of things. What works for you to get you really centered, calm, and ready? One of the big ones is to plan for quality rather than quantity. So this is just a big piece of advice that's on so many dementia blogs, on so many webinars, on so many podcasts, is it's not about the length of time you spend with folks, especially when that person doesn't have a sense of time anymore. One of the most important qualities in setting up your stage for being able to be in the present with your loved one is allowing enough time for quality connection without the focus on quantity. So there was one particular example from a podcast I was listening to where it was actually a mother-daughter duo. And the daughter was talking about that they used to spend hours on the phone with each other. And she thought that that would just continue even after the diagnosis and even after her mother moved into assisted living facilities. But what actually happened was the daughter was trying to prolong conversation and it wasn't quality, which was actually frustrating, upsetting, like frustrating and upsetting to her mother, who was struggling to participate in the call. So thankfully, a provider kind of gave the daughter a kind of a loving nudge and said, hey, maybe just focus on spending quality time. So not the quantity, just really focus in on, if it's a 10-minute phone call and it's an amazing 10-minute phone call, let it be an amazing 10-minute phone call. So that's another way that you can kind of set your own stage, is say, okay, it's not about how much time we spend together. It's about the quality of time that we're spending together. Direct your attention. So this is a pre-step before you get there. It's also something you got to think about when you are visiting with folks, whether it's in-person visits or a phone call visit. So when I say visit, I mean it very broadly these days during the pandemic. So what this actually means is that you are limiting outside distractions when you are spending any time with your loved one, and you're preparing for that. So making sure that your phone is turned off or on silent or tucked away in a purse somewhere, that your email is put away, that maybe the TV isn't on or isn't on very loud. Those kinds of things where they're pulling your attention in all these different directions, which makes it really hard to actually be present. And it's really easy to want to escape from difficult moments that require us to change relationships that we've had for a very long time. So those distractions can feel like comfort. However, what I've really learned from listening carefully is that time spent with those living with dementia is precious. And one of the most important resources that you can provide is your full and undivided attention to building that experience and being present together. Another way to set up a stage for success is to introduce yourself. So this is especially hard for folks who you've known that person your whole life, you've been together for 40 years, those kinds of like big, important relationships that you've centered your world around. At the earlier stages of dementia, it's important to just introduce yourself to your loved one, to make sure that they're not trying to figure out who are you, trying to grab for a name, trying to navigate that confusion that can come in the earlier stages. When you get to the middle stage, really introducing yourself and your relationship can be really helpful as your loved one's abilities change. Eventually, however, even like middle toward late, you'll eventually need to stop introducing yourself by your relationship because it's going to be confusing for your loved one. So you can just introduce yourself by your name as a way to really limit confusion, to focus on the present relationship, and to build a connection in the present. So that's a big one, of letting go of the need to say, hey, it's Johnanna. I'm your oldest daughter, right? Eventually your loved one won't remember that, and it will just be confusing, or they'll remember you from a different time and think of you as a 12-year-old girl, in my case, girl, right? Think of you as a 12-year-old kid rather than an adult person. And so saying, I'm your daughter, is going to be really, really confusing for them. So you want to just continue to introduce who you are and really make sure that they don't have to try to figure out who you are when you show up, or when you call on the phone, or any of those kinds of moments of connection, just helping them know. Ooh, this is a big one, y'all. Manage your emotions. That's a huge part of setting the stage for being able to be in the present with your loved one. So it kind of is setting the stage in a nutshell in many ways. But when you're in those moments, when you're working through those difficult calls, when you are on that video chat, self-managing and regulating your emotions during that interaction is absolutely a component to being able to stay present for your loved one. Because dementia fragments the self, that's a key component of many of the dementias people live with, is the sense of self starts changing. It limits those cognitive process and changes physical abilities. Because those components are all changing, your loved one starts to focus in on very specific things and will start mirroring. And so if you're internally kind of going through some stuff, if you're frustrated, if you're scared, if you're mad, if you fill in the blank with whatever it is, your loved one will quickly adopt whatever emotions you're given off and reflect your emotional state. So that's really, really big. That's one of the things we talk with our care partners on a regular basis, of your attitude determines the success of that outcome. Because folks living with dementia are looking for keys to understand how to connect in this moment, because they might not be able to process all the words that are happening. So they look for body language. So if you ever find your emotions being really overwhelming, letting your loved one know a little bit of what's happening for you is appropriate and can help you move through that moment. So you don't necessarily want to say it like, oh, I'm thinking of who you used to be and who you are now not, and that's really frustrating. But rather saying something along the lines of, oh, I was just thinking about someone that I loved very much and that I miss, but I'm so happy to be spending time with you right now. So acknowledging what's happening, because your loved one's picking up on it, whether you realize it or not. Acknowledging what's happening in a little bit more general of a sense, and then recommitting to being in that present moment. So that's one way you can kind of manage those emotions. And that you can also say something like, hey, I was thinking about something that kind of hurt, but seeing you and spending time with you makes that hurt a little less painful. One, that's a really great way to build up your relationship with your loved one, make them feel positive and connected. But it also is a way for you to just acknowledge what's happening and stay connected. Take your time, go slow, get help. So if ever you are trying to set your stage and you find yourself really struggling, slow down. We can't rush emotions. We can't rush grieving. And y'all, believe me, if I could rush through the grieving process, I would rush through every grieving process. It's important to take time. It's important to slow down. It's important to acknowledge what's happening and work through it. And most importantly, it's important to get help if you're struggling. It's okay to reach out and connect and ask for what you need. That's a key component of setting your stage. So maybe it's chatting with the site director at Rockma. Maybe it's finding a support group that works for you. Maybe it's just your own process that you find, journaling or drawing and painting, some sort of way to slow down and really say, hey, what can I do to stay present here? And then finally, even when you're thinking about your next visit, so even as you're in a visit, I want you to really think about ending on a good note. And we want to end on a good note whenever possible. And good note is a pretty flexible term, just for the record. We really want to make sure that we end on that good note. One, because your loved one is reading your body language and is going to reflect back your emotions. So if you're ending on a tough note, if you're ending on a frustrated note, a sad note, an angry note, that's what your loved one is going to remember when they see you. They won't remember what the content was, but in their mind, the emotions will be triggered. So they'll remember that something was uncomfortable, bad. And so we really want to make sure, as we're setting the stage, before we go and have connection and visits and phone calls, but even as we're ending a connection, a visit or a phone call, we want to end on a good note to make sure that we are establishing that emotional memory and that emotional connection together. Okay, let's keep going. I didn't see anyone add anything to the chat, so I'm going to keep on moving. So quick tips for living presently with your loved ones. So these are things that in the moment you can do when you're in the middle of that visit, in the middle of that call. My little friend here, the bee on the left side of your screen, has it right. That's actually why I picked this image. The easiest tip is just that. Stop and smell the roses. So most of the tips that I'm going to share with you can really be summarized under that little, phrase, stop and smell the roses. But here are the actual specific tips to use. First, it's really important to release the need for factual information and being right. It's probably the most important tip that I can give you. Of every webinar, every training, every professional that I've listened to speak, of even when I think about my interactions with all the folks and all the residents that live at Rockma, when I let go of being right, it immediately improves the relationship. And I'm a person very stuck on facts, right? Like I went and got a PhD because I love factual information and I love proving my argument with data. So when we let go of the idea that there is a single reality, there is a single set of facts that we're working with, and that we all live in it together, that's when we can actually start building our relationship and enjoying the moment together. Because the reality is that dementia impacts your loved one's ability to understand facts. It changes the reality that they're living in. And when we try to force them to come back to our facts, our reality that we've lived in for a very long time, it actually just strains the relationship and increases distress. And we previously have talked about distress. So we really want to reduce distress by just letting go. So if they insist that you stole their wallet, great, you stole their wallet and you apologize for it. No amount of you insisting you didn't is going to change the reality they're living in. And it might not even be about the wallet. It might be about something else. So you just say, hey, I'm so sorry. Let's go look for that. Let go of those facts and being right. Go with the flow. This is really closely tied with releasing facts and being right. But learning to go with the flow is going to be really important because your loved one isn't going to be able to do that. They're going to get stuck on what they want or what they need or what they think is happening because there are cognitive changes. There are physical changes to the brain happening where they lose some of the neural networks required to be able to process and think, I'm frustrated. I'm mad because I'm thirsty, right? You got to go with the flow because they're just going to be stuck on, I'm mad. I don't know what's wrong. Or they might shut down, get really quiet, withdraw, and you don't know why. So it's really important to be flexible and try to meet whatever need is happening for them. So if you argue, if you try to correct, if you try to get them to do something different, if you try to insist that they're okay, nope, you're fine, stop doing that, that only really succeeds in harming the relationship that you have with your loved one. And ultimately, that kind of harms you to some degree. So getting flexible and saying, okay, yep, there are children outside that don't have their winter coats on. Let me go tell them to come inside now. Go on out there, go with the flow. Get attention and give affection. So all kinds of attention and affection. We know that right now physical affection is not possible because it's a safety concern. but we won't always be living in this moment. So a key component of dementia-friendly communication and connection is first getting people's attention. You always want to get visual attention first because verbal processing has changed more rapidly than visual processing for most folks at various courses, at various stages in the diseases. So you really want to make sure you start with that visual connection, make sure they see you, make sure that they acknowledge that you're there in some way. And then you're going to move to verbal and then physical. So we always want to go in that process, visual, verbal, and then physical. Focus on physical and verbal affection with your loved one. So saying nice things in the tone that you're saying it. They might not fully process what you're saying, but they understand what tone means. They understand what your body language and your facial expressions and the gestures that you're using. And really importantly, no matter what happens, all humans, all of us, crave and need kindness, love, and physical touch. It is a need all the way up until the last moments of our lives across the life course, regardless of diagnosis. So, wherever your loved one is, whatever's going on for them, when you have the opportunity, reach out and hold their hand, right? Rub their feet, take care of their nails, brush their hair, or even a simple hug. That kind of attention and getting their attention, but also giving attention and affection is a key component to just living presently. That's something you can always get. You can always give kind words. You can always talk warmly to them and about them when you're connecting. And that's a way to let go of what was, what could be, and just be present with what is. Use music, religious traditions, or older stories and other auditory cues that your loved one would remember. So if you want to get in the present, if you want to get your loved one focused on something as a way to connect, go back to those key things. One of the most interesting components about the human brain, and particularly living with dementia diagnoses, is that music, religious traditions, and stories from when they were very young stay with people almost until the end. Folks might not be able to know all the words, but they'll know the beat to the song. So knowing songs that they listened to when they were younger can be really important. So the brain retains things like music, poems, religious prayers, chants, so many of those components. So if ever you're stuck and you're like, gosh, I don't know how to get my loved one in this moment with me and I'm not in the moment, I don't know what to do, fall back on the things that the brain retains for a very long time. Start singing a hymn that they might know, or recite one of their favorite poems. Things like those auditory cues, especially right now, if you're limited to phone calls and video chats, that's a really easy way to share a powerful moment where you're connecting even across the distance. Tell the person stories from their life, especially as folks progress through that journey of dementia. They won't remember those stories in the same way. So you start telling the stories as a way that you can honor what you need. You can honor that past without trying to force it on them. And it's important that if you tell the story, do not ask them to remember. Don't ask them to fill in. Don't ask them do you remember when that happened? That is going to heighten their distress pretty significantly if they can't remember. So what you want to do is really connect through telling that story. You might want to focus on your experiences in the story. You can do things like, oh my gosh, I remember this one time. I remember when we met. Here's this thing that we did. Here's this thing that you said. Here's this thing that I loved about you. Um, as the disease progresses and they don't fully recognize who you are anymore, it can be really important to just tell the story about a person that you loved. Let me tell you a story about someone I cared for very much. Let me tell you this. Oh, you said this thing and it makes me think of this story of this thing that happened. Bringing in that reminiscing, bringing in laughter, bringing in connection through story is such a good way to stay in the present, even when you're struggling to stay in the present together. Make sure that you're focusing on actions and feelings. So remember that verbal communication can be really difficult. for your loved one, especially in mid to late stages of dementia. So build on the here and now by really tuning in to your loved one in the ways that you can. Okay. So demonstrating actions using gestures. So using kind of those physical elements. If your person still has eyesight enough to be able to see those physical elements, and focus on building that positive experience. So not making it about an agenda or a schedule or the activity you thought you were going to do, but really making sure that you're focused on that experience. And it's so important, especially as your loved one's cognitive, emotional, and social and physical abilities change. Focus in on what you see as signs of their feelings and responses. So especially as someone becomes nonverbal, if someone loses mobility in their limbs, you're going to look for different different signals or signs that they're communicating their joy, their excitement, their confusion, right? You're going to look for different actions and feelings over the course. And then I can't ever say this enough, get support and connect. Y'all, I have so many podcasts on dementia that I am currently listening to. And some of them are research-based. So some of them are out of the University of Madison, University of Wisconsin-Madison, that has this enormous Alzheimer's research center. So some of it's really dry doctors talking about the research that they're doing. But then there's these other podcasts that I've been listening to of practitioners in the field who are talking about their experiences, all the way to folks living with dementia and their loved ones having conversations together about what that means and what that looks like. Sometimes support and connection can just look like hearing stories that sound like yours or hearing other folks working through it. But it can also be about actually finding support groups. So finding opportunities to connect to other folks who are also living with loved ones who have dementia can be a very powerful mechanism for being able to live presently with your loved one. Shame and stigma can be very real barriers for folks, but you can choose to move past shame and stigma and focus on getting the support that you deserve and that your loved one deserves. And remember, you are not alone. You are not the only person going through the experience, even if your experience is very specific. There are other folks who have related experiences that can fall under the umbrella with you. So be sure that you find some other bees and stop and smell the flowers together. And if it's appropriate, cry and water the flowers together, but find the other bees. Okay, this is my last content slide before we pause for any questions that you've had from all of this. Couple of finding new paths, living presently and well. And many of these are taken from those dementia conversations and podcasts that I've been listening to, because I find that listening to folks living with a loved one who has dementia and listening to folks who have dementia are the best resources for good tips. So here's some of the stuff that they've talked about that I'll share with you. Your loved one is still growing. Their life is not over because they have dementia. Their life is changing. It is, in some cases, a terminal illness, but there's still things that they can do, still things that they can explore. There are still things that they can learn about themselves, that you can learn about them, and that they can learn about you. Y'all, you can still grow. So find the things that they still have to offer and do. When we put limits on our loved ones and say, well, she can't do that anymore, he can't do that, they can't do that anymore, what we're telling them is you're not allowed to live in the present and you're not allowed to live well. You're going to be stuck in what I thought you should have been. So breaking out of that and say, hey, how are we still growing? One of the coolest things that I listened to was a woman who got a dementia diagnosis at 51. It was really difficult for her and her husband. And one of the things that she started doing was she started painting for the first time in her life. And they weren't good paintings, but she really started to express herself through those paintings, and it became a communication tool. And if her husband had said, no, like that, you don't paint, what are you talking about? Don't do that. That would have been a huge communication connection that they would have lost. So make sure that you're allowing yourself to still grow and them to still grow. Finding new areas of interest. So this is really connected to what I was just talking about. So letting go of what we think that person should have been and really encouraging new exploration, new ways of connecting to another, and new forms of self-expression. So I gave that art example. That's a powerful, powerful strategy of just exploring what's different. How can we find new areas of interest together? Maybe work on puzzles together and you never were a puzzle couple or never were puzzle siblings, right? Or you never did that with your parents. Explore what works now. This is going to sound really cheesy, but I think it's important. Changes bring with them chances. So anytime there's change, there's also opportunity and chance. And they're only different by that one little letter. We have the chance to do things differently, even as things are changing. Maybe the relationship wasn't always good, or there were places of real hurt that were left unresolved in the relationship. That doesn't change for you. However, with the changes in your loved one, that is an opportunity to rewrite some of those stories, to let go of past harm or unresolved issues. There's opportunity there if we look for it. You can build new foundations for old relationships. So, and that what that really means is being able to let go of the expectation that you will always be able to just do fill in the blank with that person. By being able to hold that you have an old relationship with some new foundations you're building, you're going to be able to create more intimacy and connection through the end of the life course. And we have to talk about that. We have to talk about how do we create different forms of that connection together. So by really embracing change as an opportunity for a chance, we can change those narratives that we have. Additionally, through accepting changes as chances, I think this is one of the coolest ones. That there was an entire podcast about this one. We get to explore old stories, but get new information, especially if your loved one doesn't recognize you as in the story anymore, which in and of itself is challenging as a loved one. But when they start talking about the story and they see you as a friend who comes and visits, or a friend who calls once a week or a couple times a week, or right when they start to see you as someone different, you can actually learn more depth and complexity of your loved one's experiences if you're just willing to embrace the chance that comes with that change. So being able to hear stories about yourself, but listening as a friend rather than as the person in the story, listening as a loved one rather than listening as a sibling, right? Those kinds of different stories and encouraging that storytelling can give you new insight to your person and really build that new foundation for that old relationship. Of course, cherishing what is present. When loving a person who's living with dementia, you really do have to learn to cherish and love who is here right now, because it might be different in 15 minutes based on those changes, right? You got to find those ways and find what's meaningful for you. Look for what connects you to your loved one. Look for what brings you joy, what brings them joy, and what can sustain the relationship through the present time, to be able to find new memories that you can continue to cherish even after they're gone. So really just holding what is here. And then the last piece here on how to live presently and well and finding new paths is find ways to honor the past. Because for you, the past hasn't changed. For you, the memories have not changed. In order to live presently and well with your loved one, find opportunities to talk about the relationship, to talk about the memories, to talk about the fights and the adventures and everything that came with loving that person. Perhaps telling stories, or finding a meaningful space to talk about your loved one with others who also knew them and cared for them. Maybe it's writing down your feelings and memories. One of the things that I've done as a part of a grieving process of letting go of a changing relationship and someone I've lost is I wrote them letters sorry, just thinking about it gets me a little. I have a very small little journal that I used to keep with me, and anytime I was really sad or lost or missing them, I wrote them a letter that I knew they would never read, but it gave me some closure and an opportunity to honor the past in a really powerful way. And It's okay to miss what's gone. I think that's really important to talk about in finding ways to honor your the past. Sorry, I got to collect myself for a second. Thanks, folks. It's okay to miss what's gone, and it's okay to grieve, and it's okay to wish for things to come back that will never come back. And if we want to live presently and well with your loved ones as they go through the journey and the progression of dementia, we got to be able to find ways that we can really hold that space for what was to be able to focus on what is and what we have now. So, okay. I just gave you a whole bunch of information. So thank you so much for hanging in there, everyone. This is an opportunity for you to ask your questions and any topics of discussion. I'm willing to stay a little bit past 7. I know we're right at 6:58 right now. I'm glad to stay for a little bit if you would like me to stay, so we can talk through whatever's going on for you or what you have, any examples you have or things you might want to share. And this is also an opportunity if you want to unmute yourself and actually speak in, you're absolutely invited to do that. You don't have to just chat in. So I'm going to pause, take a sip, and just wait and see if anyone has anything.
One of the things that I do sometimes when I'm talking to my wife is I will end the conversation trying to get it on a positive note. I'll call you tomorrow. I don't always get a chance to call tomorrow, but they would never remember that. But I guess I think it leaves a positive note.
Gordon, that's a great example. Thank you so much. And that actually, you fed right into what I talked about of ending on that positive note. That's a great strategy of, hey, I'll talk to you tomorrow. That's great. Thank you.
You were saying go with the flow.
Mm-hmm.
Discussion is increasingly incoherent.
Mm-hmm.
That we talked this afternoon, and it was particularly incoherent. And I don't know whether it's due to distraction that's going on around her at the time, but and I couldn't follow any of it. I couldn't connect it to anything. So it's hard to pick up on a flow to know how to respond. I mean, I suppose you could go along and just say, yep, yes, 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 whatever, to affirm. But I have no idea what I'm affirming.
Yeah. So you're describing something that a lot of folks struggle with. So one of the big things is what kind of emotions are they bringing? So this is just a practice tip for anyone else who has those moments of like, I have no idea what they're saying. Look to their emotional cues, look to the kind of energy they're bringing, especially if you know their baseline of energy. So I've had a number of instances in working with and just being in the homes at Rockma of folks wanting to chat with me, and I have no idea what's happening in the conversation. And one of the best tips that I ever got was you just match their energy. So if they're like smiling and laughing and chatting, and then they stop at they like, say incoherent things, but then stop and laugh with them, right? And say, oh my gosh, that's too funny. You don't really know. Gordon, you're 100% correct. You don't really know what you're affirming at that point. But if you're focused less on factual information, that reality sharing, and really just focus on going with the flow and being like, you know what, let's do this, and laughing with them, I have found that those are really powerful moments that I've had with residents at Rockma. Oh, she's laughing. Okay. Oh my gosh, that's a wild story. And then they'll just keep chit-chatting at me. And that moment is just about connecting with another person. So that's, if you see that they're really sad or frustrated or upset, just being and reflecting, okay, so what would I say to someone if I understood what they were saying and they were upset or sad or frustrated? Okay, and kind of going with that. So that's some ways to manage that incoherency, but it doesn't change how hard it is to manage that incoherency. So I just want to acknowledge that's really hard. And you can follow that flow of energy with them.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. pick up the cues, because sometimes it's coherent, but sometimes I can sense that she's agitated,
Mm-hmm.
concerned about something, wanting to fix something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, eh, those are some of the, and I guess that's what, even if I don't understand what's going on, you can pick up the cue of where they are emotionally. That's a good idea. Thank you.
Oh, of course. And I see we just had a chat in. Judy is saying that she actually has the same issue, but you can't see the emotion on the phone. Listen in. So listen closely. Like if there's someone who's really animated, right? Let's say they're not really an animated person in their previous life with you, and all of a sudden they're really animated, that's telling you that there's a lot of energy there. If they're really quiet and withdrawn and that's not normal for them and not normal in your experience of them, saying, "Hey, it seems like you're a little quiet. I just want to tell you, I'm so glad we're on the phone today." Right? Coming back to that dementia friendly communication of complementary communication, so you're not asking a bunch of questions which can raise frustration and distress, but also just connecting and say, hey, you really matter to me and it seems like you're a little down, right? Like it's okay to not feel okay. Just kind of basic affirming sentences, and especially when you're on that phone, that's so hard to see for sure. If you can, maybe talk with the providers, talk with the staff members before you get on the phone and say, hey, kind of, can you give me a gauge of kind of where my person's at? Can you talk about a little bit maybe like how their day has been, so that way I know how to respond? Um, using all the tools available at your disposal to get that gauge on where they are, and then just responding in like. And that's actually something, especially in the later stages, that I would like to recommend is as your person um, kind of loses abilities around verbal communication, start talking to them more. So if you're able to visit in person, watch a TV show and just chit chat at them about it. Like, oh my gosh, did you see that guy on the TV? Oh, that's so funny. All you're doing is trying to create emotional connection. So even though they might not be able to respond in the same way, you can keep chit chatting at them. You can continue to build that relationship and spend quality time together.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's one of the things I always do when I call. It's obviously staff that answers the phone,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll ask them, how's she doing? How's she
Mm-hmm.
feeling? And I never thought about it as getting a reading beforehand. Of course, I usually get the same answer. Oh, she's doing fine.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
A couple of times I've called, and they've said, "Oh, she's really lively today. She's been talking to all kinds of people," meaning the other residents. Well,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great little like testing of the temperature, and say like, hey, like what's up? Like where's my loved one at right now? And I know in this case it's your wife. Where's my wife at today? That way you can have a better understanding and read on how to respond. If she's really chatty, she might just be really excited because she's had conversations all day, right?
yeah. Or they might say, "Oh, she just got up from a nap," and I can almost tell that because she's kind of slow to talk.
Yeah, and don't
Yes.
be afraid to fill in and just chit chat about what's happening for you. Of course, you're going to want to go pretty slow in what you're saying. But folks, you can always fill in and chit chat at folks and share, like, hey, here's what's going on for me. Oh, I had this really exciting discovery. I saw a snail in the garden today, right? Whatever is your exciting I think finding a snail in my garden would be an exciting discovery. Also frustrating, get out of my garden. But just sharing what's happening for you to kind of fill those gaps for folks. Because again, you're just focusing on building that emotional connection.
In fact, that's a lot of what we end up doing, is I end up her telling her what I've been doing, like for the day or whatever. Or like her sister called me last week, and I would get on the phone and said, "Hey, Linda called me." I was telling her how you're doing and all that kind of stuff. So
Those are great things to be doing. You're doing right, Gordon. You're doing right. I'm just checking my chat. Okay. Any other questions, discussion points, or anything else anyone wants to chat about?
I guess I'd make one other comment.
Of course.
she loves to sing, and I do too. And we did a lot of that together before. So sometimes I'll call and music's playing and she's humming and singing along with it. Forget about having a conversation at that point. So we just kind of hum together.
Oh, I
We'll
love
sing together.
that.
And that's our conversation.
Oh my gosh. And again, as long as you're willing to adjust your own expectations of what was going to come, that's an amazing way to just live. Gordon, you're giving great examples of how to live in the present with your, in this case, your wife, but for others, with your loved one, of just going with that flow. Okay, today is a humming day. And
Yeah.
as long as you are both taking a positive experience from that and you're shifting your expectations around what that communication is going to look like, embrace that flow and say, okay, today's a humming and singing day. That means it's still a good day. So you're giving great examples, Gordon.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Singing is always a good day for her.
Oh my gosh. I mean, if you're someone who I am not a person who sings, so I don't know that that would be true for me, but I'm really excited that that's happening, that your wife gets that opportunity and you get to have that opportunity to build with her too.
Yeah, thanks for this. You got given me lots of good ideas. I appreciate that.
Good. Oh, I'm so glad. Okay. I don't see any other chats. And Gordon, as long as you don't have anything else, I'm going to go through our last slide and then get us on out of here if that's okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So, what we covered today, just as a quick reminder of all that's went on. So, we talked about some of the impacts of dementia on the present and the way that it impacts both you and your loved one. We talked about a lot of strategies to prepare. So, setting that stage for visits, calls, and those opportunities for connection. And I know that sounds like such a touchy feely thing to say, but truly, I view every moment as that opportunity for connection with your loved ones. Gave an overview of some best practices directly from folks living with dementia and their loved ones, and those quick tips about what it looks like to live in the present and spend that quality time together. We talked about your questions and discussion points, and in this case, the opportunities that you've had to build living in the present into your daily relationships. So with that, we're going to come to the end of our recording here. So thank you so much for joining us today. Please reach out and connect to RACMA. We are a small but mighty nonprofit. Please get a hold of us. You can call us at the main line, which is 612-824-2345 if you have any questions. And you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. And I'm super excited because Marcia is actually the person who upkeeps our social media, and she is always adding good content to both our Facebook and our Instagram. So I highly recommend if you want to see changes going on at RACMA, you want to see fun pictures, you want to get these kinds of announcements about upcoming webinars that we're doing for friends, family, and community members. Those are great places to find us. Again, as a reminder, if you want to get a hold of me directly because you have questions, jgans@racma.org. And I'll be sending out the survey again when I send out all of the materials on Friday or Monday. So please take a moment and fill out that survey. It stays open. So if you're listening to the recording, you can still find that survey link with what I sent out. Please give us your feedback and your ideas. I want to make sure that the Friends, Family, and Community webinar program is something that actually is helpful for all of you and what you want to be hearing. So give us your ideas, and thanks for listening.